We're calling this teaching offenses. It is based on a Luke 17, 1 to 2. We will get into these pictures a little bit later into the teaching. And the verses that we're looking at today, Luke 17, 1 and 2. Then said he, meaning Yeshua, unto the disciples, It is impossible, but that offenses will come, but woe unto him through whom they come. It were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he cast into the sea, than that he should offend one of these little ones. I would have loved to get the entire first 6 verses in on this teaching, but seeing everything that was covered, I would feel that the listener would seriously be shortchanged, and that's not something we want to do. But when I got to studying this, I found that there wasn't anything that there was too much information on. It's not a problem. It just means we have to look in different places, and it really means that we've got to break it down. And so that's what I did. There's some terms. We need to know exactly what's going on. Those terms, to start with, are offenses, impossible, and millstone. So let's start there. Offenses. The word is scandalon, and this is 4625 in your Strong's Concordance. This was originally the name of a part of a trap to which the bait is attached, hence the trap or snare itself. You see an example of this in the book of Romans 11:9. You see stumbling block. It's quoted from Psalm 69:22. In Revelations 2:14, for Balaam's device was rather a trap for Israel than a stumbling block to them. And in Matthew 16:23, for in Peter's words, the Lord perceived a snare laid for him by Hasatan. The New Testament, this word scandalon, it appears metaphorically and ordinarily of anything that arouses prejudice or becomes a hindrance to others or causes them to fall by the way. I want you to think about something as we go through this teaching today. Look at these things that can cause stumbling, that can cause another person to fall away from the faith. Prejudice. Something that becomes a hindrance. What could become a hindrance? If you said the things you do, well, that's obvious. I'm sorry, but that's low-hanging fruit. But what about things you didn't do? What about things you should have done? What about things that were in the power of yourself to do that you didn't do? Something to think about. Keep that in the back of your mind, because when we think of things, we think of things like, you stole from somebody, or you hurt somebody, or you embarrassed somebody, or maybe you cost them something. But what about if they knew you were a believer, and the reason they wanted to be with you that day was because you could share the love of Christ, thereby cheering them up? What if it was just reassurance? See, because when we look at things that are stumbling blocks, we look at things that were intended to be stumbling blocks. And so I'll be asking you throughout the teaching to search your own heart within your dealings with people, and see, because it's not too hard to see what we've done through action. But what have we done through inaction? What have we done in poor representation of Christ? So let's move forward. Sorry, I was going to save that for the end, but the proverbial cat's out of the bag, as they say. And it's also the scandalon. It's a noun, that which causes the sin or gives occasion for sin. what do we use? What's a phrase we use in Christianity a lot? We talk about things that open a door. Gives occasion for sin, that which causes stumbling or trouble or an obstacle. See, when God has this thing with his followers, we look in our Western way of thinking, and the person we're concerned with is the person we see in the mirror. And that is the heart of our concern. But we get into the Jewishness of our faith, there's more of a corporate you. It's not just you, it's those who are also believers. It is a type of thing where it's more of a community type thing. And in that setting, you see yourself as a larger part of a whole. And so you don't want to do anything to offend that larger part. Now, granted, when it comes to judgment, rewards, or punishments, mind you, there is an individual accountability, isn't there? But what does God want from that whole? Think about this as we go through the teaching. What does God want from that whole? That echad, which is a corporate unity. What does God want from that? He wants it to be healthy, doesn't it? He wants it to be healthy. Keep that in mind. God is into restoring things. Man is into breaking things, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Talking about our word here, we also see some scriptures where this is used. And the word is the verb form of a Greek noun that means stumbling, block, or snare. The term refers to the trigger which springs a trap. To me, I don't know, the first thing I think of is the mouse trap. The term refers to the trigger which springs a trap. In the New Testament, it means anything that hinders someone from doing what is right, or causes one to sin, or what? Fall away from the faith. See, this is where we get away in our thinking, and we say, well, they made the decision. I can't help it if them seeing me getting drunk, or whatever the sin, that they look to you, because you may have been their representation of Messiah. You may be the only representation of Messiah they see. So if they see you doing something, and they're young in their faith, or they've been in their faith a while but really haven't matured a whole lot, you want to make sure you don't cause them to stumble by what you do, because you may be the only representation of Messiah that they have, or the one they hold to most strongly. They may or may not tell you that. It also says that Yeshua emphatically warns that stumbling blocks are sure to come our way. It's inevitable. Nonetheless, he condemned those who put stumbling blocks in the way of believers. He says that death by drowning would be preferable to offending one of these little ones in the faith. We're going to have to break down all these terms to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, we're all on the same page, and so that we can look at things properly and know what's actually being said. Okay, when you go to the Septuagint, you're going to find that our word in the Gospel of Luke goes back to a specific word in the Hebrew, and that word is specifically found in the Septuagint in two places. Very intriguing, the two places it was found. Leviticus 19:14. And Psalms 119, 165. Now this is interesting. But look at this. Leviticus 19:14. Thou shalt not curse the deaf. Why? because the deaf can't hear you. Right?
Right.
That'd be a pretty mean thing to do, wouldn't it? Or put a stumbling block before the blind. They wouldn't see it. Oh, but won't that be funny?
Mm.
Is it funny if it hurts the whole? See, we don't think about that. We think about ourselves. But think about that echad. That's a corporate unity. Think of the whole. But shall fear God, I am the Lord. Now I want you to see something else. We look at things and we get caught up on one extreme or another. Either we just want to make things extremely literal on one side, and nothing outside that literal fits. Or we want to get extremely metaphorical on the other side, and we get out of bounds, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
This is a danger we have. But I want you to think about something. If we're spiritualizing this, a person who was deaf or who was blind, would they or would they not be depending on other people?
Yeah, they would be.
Could it describe somebody who's depending on somebody else? Now, if you're spiritually deaf or blind, and you've got a choice between believing on or leaning on Balaam or leaning on a follower of Yeshua, somebody you know to be a follower of Yeshua, who will you choose?
Hopefully Yeshua.
Hopefully the follower of Yeshua, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if this follower of Yeshua does something and they're doing something wrong, do you see where this applies? They would be your ears and your eyes. You'd be leaning on them. So by you not watching what you do, see, because what we do affects other people. We don't realize that. But I want you to think of something else. The Bible talks about those who really haven't made a commitment for Yeshua. And to a lot of these people, what does the Word of God appear as? Foolishness, right?
Mm-hmm.
It appears as nonsense. But I'll tell you what, when people are hurting, and they realize that in and of themselves there's just something not right, and there's a certain helplessness to be able to make things right, that has a way of bringing people to wondering about God, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And if you're that representative of God, because that's what we are, gang, we're agents. What does that say? That says something very loud. Represent God appropriately. Represent God appropriately, because you may not be the best evangelist. You may not be swift of tongue or be very creative. But what if your actions are all they need to see? What if you're not dependent on your own mind or your own knowledge of Scripture, but the living God who created all things, in whose Spirit lives within you, will guide and lead you what to say and what to do? Something to think about. Because at that moment, in a spiritual sense, this application would tell you, make sure you don't do anything to make them stumble. But here's something I really love. In Psalms 119, 165, great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them. I love this, because we've got people who, pains me to say it, but are taught that you don't need the Torah. It's done away with. Well, I don't know about you, but great peace sounds like a pretty good thing to me. I'll choose that over chaos any day of the week. So great peace have they which love thy law, thy Torah, thy instructions. In other words, those people who truly love God's instructions, they're not offended, are they? That's a pretty cool thing. They're not going to fall into traps. Why? Because they know the instructions. So in other words, the instructions of God can keep you from falling into a trap? Well, let's get a little bit deeper. I want to spend a little bit of time on this. I want to go back to the Gospel of Matthew. It's funny I should use the term go back, being we haven't been there yet today. But in Matthew 22:34-39, it says, "But when the Pharisees heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they decided to believe him." No, that's not what it says, is it? They were gathered together. So what do they want to do? They want to put Yeshua to their test. Does he match who we think he should be? In other words, we're going to judge God by our standards. That's another thing we do. Would that cause somebody to stumble? Something to think about. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, now this isn't a guy in a three-piece suit who has got an 8 to 10 year degree through Harvard. This is a guy who is a Torah, very, very understanding in Torah, very learned in Torah. And he asked him a question, tempting him and saying, "Master, which is the great commandment in the law?" So he's quizzing Yeshua. He does have an ulterior motive. But, gang, what happens when you try and test God? How does that go for you? Don't you already find that God knows you better than you know yourself? Don't you find that God's going to show you that you knew the answer to your question? Which means you should have known better than to test him? That's what's going to happen here. Yeshua said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind." Okay, I want to let you know something. That would have been very familiar to this person who was questioning him. Because there was a thing that they had in the Second Temple period, and they wanted to be able to recite the entire Torah every day. Try that sometime. Try with Bereshit and get all the way to the last word of Devarim. And try and do that every day. What are the odds? Not good. Matter of fact, I apologize because I may have just put a stumbling block in your way. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. So what did they do? They came up with 3 sections of Scripture. And they said that this here represents the entirety of the Torah. And we say that every day when we do liturgy. It's called the Shema. In the Hebrew culture, when you did something like this and you were going to give it a name, because we look at the books in our Christian Bibles, and we named our books differently, didn't we? We've got Genesis, Exodus, right? We've got Numbers. We've got Leviticus. We've got Deuteronomy. That's how we chose to name them. But the Jews didn't do that. They named them after the first significant word. So, what Yeshua is quoting here is the first line from the thing I've been talking about called the Shema. And we'll look at that. And he says, this is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So if we just took this on face value and we didn't know what I just told you, what would we see? On our simple level, we would see that the Torah teaches us, the aim of the Torah teaches us how to love God, how to honor God, how He wants to be loved, how He wants to be acknowledged, how He, gang, get this, how He feels love and gratitude from us. Because we think about it, what have we got to give God? obedience, love, and gratitude. If he tried to manufacture that, it wouldn't be real. It wouldn't be genuine. So, if Torah is not valid, tell me something. What have you got to offer God? He told you. He gave you instructions. But the second thing is really wild because this is from Leviticus 19. And it's from what we call Leviticus 19:18. Gang, understand, you go through a Torah scroll, you open it up, you don't find Leviticus 19 verse 18 by chapter and number. It's just written out. Those chapters and numbers were put in by the Catholic Church in the medieval ages. That was something they put in. That wouldn't have occurred in the first century. So when you quoted something from Leviticus 19, what would people have understood? They would have understood that you were referring to the entirety of Leviticus 19. So when Yeshua is talking to this scholar, this person who teaches Torah, he told him, he says, if you want to understand Torah, the entirety of the Shema, which he probably would have smiled, but the second one really would have got him, but not for the reason you're thinking. This occurred to me just this morning. I've been teaching this for years. Just this morning, God opened it up and showed me something absolutely amazing. Leviticus 19 is the other thing that would teach you how to love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. So let's look at this just a little bit. Leviticus 19 starts off, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto all the congregation of Israel, and say unto them, You shall be holy." Now, when he's talking about being holy, he's not saying, gang, you know what? You know me, and now you're holy. That's active. That's something you're deciding to be holy. And in one of the things that sums up the Torah, this book that God gave us to teach us how to properly love, how to properly serve Him, how to properly be echad, right? We are called to be holy. That's a choice that we make. He says, "For I, the Lord your God, am holy." If we're called to be holy, and He is holy, in a small way at least, to the best of our ability, we're called to be like the best of Him. But even that's not what I'm getting at. What would have been puzzling that lawyer, that Torah scholar, because when you quoted something, usually you quoted the first couple verses, what we would call the first couple verses. Granted, in Hebrew, this is probably all one long thing. This is what that young sage would have been expecting to hear. But Yeshua went down to practically the middle. And he quoted that. Because the Pharisees, gang, I'm not picking on the Pharisees. Far be it from me. Far be it from me. Yeshua lined up with the Pharisees quite well. As far as the heart of their teachings, the method of the teachings, the mannerisms. They had the gist of it. And if you told them to be holy, gang, they understood that. They taught how to be holy. But if you told them, and you started halfway down nearly in the middle, and the verse, if I'm not mistaken, right before it says, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart." Oh my word! What is he telling the Pharisees? He may have said, you guys are doing your best to be holy, but if he's starting there, he's telling them, you've missed the spirit of the law, isn't he? Mm-hmm. He says, you're doing these things. It's in the center of your mind. It's what you think about, but somehow you forgot that these were instructions to not only love God, but how to love your neighbor. Because if they weren't following the instructions at all, he could have very easily, and would have, and he would have been expected to start with what we call the first couple of verses, but he didn't start there. He didn't start there. So he was bringing a message home. Even here, he would have been telling him, and that would have been heard loud and clear, because that would have caught him off guard. That's why you don't see any type of rebuttal. Because if he starts there, the Pharisees would have already said, hey, we've been doing this. This is how we live. There would have been a response, but there wasn't. Something to keep in mind. But what does that tell us? Don't fall in the same thing, right? Remember that these are instructions. It's not a to-do list today. They're not goals. They're not tasks. They're helping us in growing in love, right? Growing in love and being echad, but not just being echad with one another, but being echad with God. He tells us how to do this. Impossible. We see that, and it's really strange, the wording in this, and I'm not an English major by any stretch of the imagination, but the wording is really strange because you're dealing with the double negative. And this word impossible, it does pertain to not being possible in the sense of not being in accord with human experience. He says, it is impossible that things which cause people to sin should not happen. And if you studied English in college or you did really good in high school, that's like fingernails running down a chalkboard when you hear that. You're just sort of cringing. He says, but in view of the double negation in Luke 17:1, it may be better to translate as things that make people fall into sin are bound to happen. That's what you're really looking at. The derivative meaning of this word in the context of Luke 17:1 is thus a matter of inevitability as based upon human experience. You look deep enough, and it's really amazing because you look deep enough in the account in Genesis of that creation that's listed in the Bible, and the name given to this creation that is in the likeness of God is Adam. And if you go deeper down in the definition of Adam, do you know what you find? The word hypocrite. That should tell you something. This is a millstone. Now, this millstone is huge, gang. This takes a very strong animal to which this is attached to, and as the animal walks around in a circle, this turns. Usually driven by a donkey. Now, if this were driven by a donkey, and you unattached this huge cylindrical item, placed it around somebody's neck, and if you had the ability to toss them, how well would they swim? Not at all. They got a ticket going straight down, don't they?
Yep.
Okay. And millstone, this is actually two words. The Authorized Version translated as millstone and twice, and millstone once. Okay, a millstone is a large mill consisting of two stones, an upper and a larger one. The nether stone was stationary, but the upper one was turned by a donkey. And it's also describes the noise that was made. Now, one of the words, and it talks about a place where it appears, but it describes something that is turned by a donkey, and that these animals were often used to turn the millstones because it's heavy. You need something with some brute force to be able to move this. And there's a reason I bring this up. I'll show you in just a minute here. This is a lot of people who've studied Scripture, they've looked at this word millstone. They didn't think it was that thing driven by a donkey. They said, well, what it is, these are hand grinders. They were in most homes. And the second piece that you see off to the right fits on top of this bottom piece with a peg. And you can see in the picture on the right, there's a hand on it, and you can turn it around, and this will grind it. So we really got to decide which one is it. But what they believed is that you would tie a rope through the place where the pole would stick through, right? And you put this around someone's neck. Gang, this would have been, about 18 inches. Maybe as big as 2 feet. It's going to have some weight. But the question is that going to take you straight down? I'm thinking you can slip out of that. You'd have a much better chance of slipping out of that than you would that other one, wouldn't you? So let's look at a few things. It says a millstone was a cylindrical stone used in a mill for grinding grain. The millstone was normally from 18 inches to 2 feet across. They're saying it's the hand one. And might easily be hung around the neck of a person to be drowned. Some commentators, however, now, gang, understand the connotation here. They're saying this is what they truly believe. So what they're getting at is, well, other people who don't agree with us, here's what they think. I'm one of those people who don't agree with them. Some commentators, however, are of the opinion that bias millstone, as the original both Matthew and Mark may be rendered, is meant a stone larger that used in ordinary mills, one so large as to require brute force to turn it. Such a stone would sink a body to the depths of the sea beyond the possibility of recovery. I tend to agree and fall in the some commentators. We'll get into that. There is no evidence that the mode of punishment named in our text verse was ever practiced by the Jews. Okay? But what does Yeshua do when he tells stories? He gets your attention, doesn't he? He pictures things, uses hyperbole, uses exaggeration. Gang, can a camel pass through the eye of a needle? Remember that? Remember all the things that different people through the years have come up with? But no, they're trying to make something out of nothing. This is a way of describing an impossibility. But if you want to really drive the case home, think about Luke 16, which we just finished. Do you remember what he said for the end parable? The end was of hell. We have every reason to believe that, that is a realistic picture of hell. It wasn't his purpose to, at that point, to just say, hey, best you understand hell. It was a finality of the thing. So what you're looking at is, you're looking at something that's going to make an impression. That huge millstone's going to make an impression, because if that goes around your neck, like it says, there's no possibility of being saved. It's over, right? That's what you're looking at. It says it was in use, however, by the ancient Syrians, Romans, Macedonians, and Greeks. It was inflicted on the worst class of criminals, especially on parricides, one who murders his or her mother and father or near relative, and those guilty of sacrilege. Now, Mr. Mackey says that the donkey stone of 17:2 may simply mean the revolving upper stone of the common hand mill. He's also in the same class as having the more active share in the work of grinding. If the reference to be, and this is where he hits it right on the head, if the reference be to the larger kind of stone driven by animal or water power, the allusion would be a case of emphatic hyperbole. Absolutely right. Like the passage of a camel through the slit of a needle. He's using hyperbole. He's giving a very exaggerated example to really drive the point home, to get your intention, to make sure you are going to remember. In Revelations 18:21, it is a strong angel that is described as casting such a stone. Now here's where I really make my case. Contrary to what is often asserted, there is no evidence of the use in biblical times of a small rotary hand mills with a peg by which the rider was made to turn around a small plug of hardwood fixed in the center of the lower stone. In other words, in that period, it didn't exist. I'd say that makes my case pretty strong, wouldn't you? It is true that the Greek terms onos, donkey, can refer to the upper grinding slab, and that the Hebrew word hamor also meaning donkey is sometimes used in the Mishnah and the later writings as a metaphorical designation of a load carrier, such as the bed base in Mishnah Kalim 18:3. Yet to conclude from these the data that the Rahaim Sel Hamor was in fact a small rotary handmill fixed upon an undercarriage is unwarranted speculation. The Jerusalem Talmud refers to the practice of putting a horse to the treading mill, Rehaim, which supposes the presence of an animal-driven rotary mills. And the Jerusalem Talmud, Pesah 427a. It is furthermore not accidental that in the Greek text of the Gospel, the millstone is no longer called donkey onos, but donkey driven. Milos okonos. Onakos. Yeah, I need some help in that area. The archaeological evidence adduced in support of the small rotary mill is based on erroneous interpretations. What modern scholars have considered to be Iron Age milling implements are in fact potter's wheels, as the smooth surfaces of the objects in question show. In order to serve their purpose, the grinding stones needed to have a rough surface. The rotary hand mills used by the Palestinian Arabs and described by ethnographers of the 19th and 20th centuries did not come into use until when? The Middle Ages. That's a little bit after Yeshua's time, wouldn't you say? Mm-hmm. Who were the little ones? You got to know this, don't you? Because what does it say? We're better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he cast in the sea that he should fend one of these little ones? Gang, I'd want to know who those little ones are. Does that mean that I just watch myself around kids and I can do whatever I want against somebody else? Because, hey, they're not little ones. There are people who actually teach. Not that you can do whatever you want around people who aren't children, but he's just talking about kids. Forgive me for saying this, but that's ludicrous. See, we go back to Luke 15. We're still in a continuation of Luke 15. How many children are mentioned from Luke 15? I'm not talking about, two brothers, because those brothers are both adults in what we call the prodigal son. How many children? I got a nice round number for you. Zero. So why would all of a sudden Yeshua mention children's? You've seen how 17 starts off. It's got to have a pretext. The pretext, unless you believe Yeshua just spouts stuff off out of the blue all the time, there's always a pretext, gang. That pretext starts in Luke 15. So we're going to get our little ones. Let's find out. Matthew 18, 1-11. Now you can also look, I'm not going to do this today, but you can also see Mark's version of the same thing. And you're even going to understand how Yeshua can use such language, as a millstone cast around his neck. You're going to see how it could use hyperbole, because we're going to put it into context. We're really going to put things together here, and the Gospel of Matthew is really going to help us to do that. This is from the TS98 version, also known as the Scriptures. At that time, the taught ones, the disciples, came to Yeshua saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And Yeshua called a little child to him. People saying, see? It is the children. What is he doing? He's making a point, isn't he? He's using this child as a metaphor. Called a little child to him, set him in their midst, and said, truly I say to you, unless you turn and become as little children. Can these people go back in time? You better believe they can't. You shall by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. So what is it about that child? Since they can't go back in time, child doesn't, he might try and argue with you, especially some of today's kids, but he's more likely to be amazed by what you say, or she's more likely to be amazed by what you say. You have a more captive audience. You have a more trusting audience. A healthy children anyways. You do not have a cynical audience. You have an audience that is teachable, right?
Right.
You have an audience that will be looking to be obedient, will be learning, looking for somebody from whom to get instruction from. Because we come to a point in our lives where we think we can't be trained anymore. We don't need to be trained. We have plenty of life experience. We've got degrees. We've got experience. We've got a number of things that we've arrived. Child knows he hasn't arrived yet, or she knows she hasn't arrived yet. So that's one of the things being talked about. It says, whoever then humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the reign or in the kingdom of heavens. And whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. He's talking about the humility of a child. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it is better for him that a millstone be hung around his neck and that he be drowned in the depth of the sea. What he's talking about is believers. What else do you have to do if you come to Yeshua? Let's just say you're a grown adult, and you came to Yeshua as a grown adult. You are filled with the knowledge of this world. You were taught by the education of this world, the media of this world, experiences of this world, and you're going to compare everything of this world to another world. Oh my word. You're going to have to become like a child, aren't you?
Yep.
You're going to learn that a lot of your reasoning patterns are wrong. You're going to really realize you've been taught a lot of things that just aren't so. You're going to learn you need to relearn some stuff. It's a good thing that God also shows himself as a father to us, doesn't it? It's where that really comes in. So what is that going to make you? A young believer, isn't it? And when I say an immature believer can be one who may know but chooses not to act in the manner of what he knows. But it can also be someone who is very young in their walk. Am I right?
Right.
What can it also be? Someone who's on the edge, just that close, ready to make that commitment. But they're not quite sure whether they want to let go of this world and grab hold of the next. What does it say? Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks. For it is necessary the stumbling blocks come. But woe to that man by whom the stumbling block comes. Matthew's not done yet. What does he say? You want to talk about hyperbole? And if your hand or foot caused you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away from you. That's pretty harsh. Do you think he's actually talking about maiming yourself? That would go against Scripture. But what is he saying? In very graphic terms, he says, if there's something that causes you to fall away from God, avoid it. Like poison, right? Or the plague. You don't want that. You're better off just totally avoiding that thing that causes you to plague. Causes you to plague. Boy, my mind's all over the place this morning. You avoid that thing that's going to make you sick. That's going to kill you.
Right.
That's going to keep you out of the kingdom of heaven. What's a millstone going to do? It's going to take you straight to the bottom of the sea. Gang, the reason that's better, it's not because you're being punished. But if that takes you straight down to the bottom of the sea, you can't offend. You can't disrupt that akkad. You can't disrupt that community, right? You can't do any more sin. You're dead. That's a pretty graphic way of saying it, isn't it? But what else does he say? It is better for you to enter into life lame or crippled, rather than having 2 feet and to be thrown into everlasting fire. It's almost a commentary on the last parable of Luke 16, isn't it? Wouldn't he have been better off with a millstone? He says, and if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out and throw it away from you. So in a parallel passage in Matthew, it is loaded with hyperbole, isn't it? He's not talking about maiming. He's making a case. He's driving the point home in a very exaggerated form that you are sure to get the message. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye, rather than having 2 eyes to be thrown into the fire of Gehenna. Remember, Gehenna was the garbage dump. The burning garbage dump. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I say to you that in the heavens their messengers always see the face of my Father who is in the heavens. For the Son of Man, or Adam, has come to save that which was lost. So what else do we see in here? We see that those who don't yet know the Lord are of the utmost value to him. So much so, these young believers, if you're lost, it doesn't say you're immature. It says you're lost. It means you haven't made that commitment yet. It means you haven't made God King of your life, Lord of your life. This is why I equate children also to people who God knows will make that commitment. Do we know who is going to make that commitment and who isn't? No. Do we know if somebody says they've made that commitment, if they've really made that commitment? No. God knows. We don't. So don't just think that children is necessarily those who are young in their faith or those who have just decided they've gone as far as they want to go. Or maybe they said, well, I'm not ready to commit that part of my life. Immature believers is a broad spectrum. We could spend all day talking about that. But we see the value of those who don't yet know him. In the Gospel of John, chapter 13, 33 to 35, now God really opened up some things to me this morning. There is a line of thinking, and it's very popular amongst synoptics. You've got Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And they all have the same stories. We've got a lot of them that appear in all 3. And then there's that John character. John is, well, he's out there somewhere. I don't know why he doesn't have the same stories. That's a very Western way of looking at it. But now here's the thing. Think about this. Maybe John doesn't have the same stories. But what does John have? And here's something I saw this morning, at least in this one case, and I'm very excited to see if this is going to play out in other cases as well. John has the heart of the matter. He may not have this story that we see over here in the other Gospels, but what if he has the heart of the matter? What if that's what was important to John? Maybe if what was taught in Matthew 18 or in Luke 17 or in Luke 16, John has the heart of the story. Look at this. John 13, 33 to 35. Little children, yet a little while I am with you, ye shall seek me, and as I said to the Yehudim, the Jews, where I am going you are unable to come. I now also say to you, a renewed command I give you, that you love one another. Oh my word, as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. It's the heart of the matter, isn't it? What if John thinks in a different manner, doesn't record the incidents, but is actually bringing out the heart of the matter? Now, this is interesting because I am one of the people, and it's not going to change the meaning of the teaching, but I am one of the people who actually believes that the letters of John and the Gospel of John are the same people. We're going to get into that, and you'll see one of the reasons why I believe that. Here it is. Look at this. This is beautiful. 1 John chapter 2, 1 to 13. Here again from the Scriptures. John's really helped me out with this teaching, gang. I mean, he's written a commentary for me right here. He says, "My little children, I write this to you so that you do not sin." That's God's best for us, right? He's given us instructions. He's saying, here's how I want you to do things. Here's what honors me. Here's how you are able to show love to me, right? Through obedience. And you show love to one another. And together we can be a echad. He said, "I write this to you so that you do not sin. And if anyone sins," in other words, it's not like game over. If you sin, you're like, "Oh, no, man, I was doing great for about 24 minutes, and then I did this. Game over." No. There is a way to fix this, right? There's encouragement. If anyone sins, we have an intercessor. The King James uses the term advocate with the Father, Yeshua Messiah, a righteous one. If he weren't a righteous one, he wouldn't be much of an intercessor, would he? In God's eyes, he couldn't be. And he himself is an atoning offering for our sins. Right? But what else does he say? And not for ours only, but also for all the world. So God's really not willing that any should perish. He's getting their eyes off of just themselves as an individual unity, right? As an immediate corporate unity, and a worldly unity of believers of the Father joined to him through the Messiah, right? Here, look at this. And by this we know, and this word know, when you look it up, it doesn't mean like, "Oh yeah, I know David. I've known David. Hey, we've been friends for 13 years, and we joke and laugh, and oh boy, I could tell you stories." No, we're not going to get into that. It says by this, what it really means is that you understand. When you look at that word, you realize that every time it appears in this chapter of John, it means to truly understand somebody. And by this we understand that we understand him if we do what? I love it. It says guard his commandments. Because the Hebrew word that this goes back to is shamar. I love that word. Mm-hmm. It's to protect something, to guard something, to hold something so close to you, so dear to you, it is so valuable to you. Well, let's just put it this way. Think of it as one of 10 coins. Mm-hmm. And you've lost this one coin. Well, you still have 9. That's 90%. You're going to be all right. But it's so valuable to you, you will spend all day sweeping with a candle in a dark place looking for that. Or maybe, think of it like you've got 100 sheep and you've lost one. That's 99%. That's pretty good. But no, you're going to do whatever it takes. You're going to leave the 99. You're going to go out and get the one. Now, that's talking about people. But if you guard God's commandments, which teach you how to love, do you see the connection? Because they teach you how to love. And we guard the commandments in the same manner. Because otherwise, what would we do? We would love in the same way that the world loves. Does that glorify God? Does that make marriages work? No. Does that work? Is that what makes friendships really work? No. Loving like God shows to love. Watch this. It says, and by this we understand that we understand him if we guard his commandments. The one who says, I know him, and does not guard his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever guards his word, truly the love of Elohim has been perfected in him. Do you remember back when we talked about Psalms 119? I believe it was one phrase 165. And those who love the Torah, nothing shall offend them. Do you see in the letter of John, chapter 2, he describes how that's possible? He does a wonderful commentary on that. It's beautiful. It says, by this we understand that we are in him. That's amazing. The one who says he stays in him ought himself also to walk. You remember the little things that people used to wear? It says, do what Jesus did. They had little bracelets. They had it on the T-shirts. They had it on their caps. They had bumper stickers. Yep. That's easy stuff, gang. That's window dressing. That's window dressing. It ain't the house. It's the thing on the windows that makes the house look a little bit better. But the house still needs some work, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. Right. That's all it is. That's window dressing. It's a, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? Well, Jesus was Torah obedient. The Torah taught you how to love God, how to love your neighbor. It taught you how God was to be honored. If you were going to do Yeshua was the Torah made flesh. If you were going to do what Yeshua did, you had the instructions of God to show you how to do it, didn't you? That's what John was saying. The one who says he stays in him ought himself also to walk even as he walked. It doesn't mean that you're not saved. See, people try and make everything a salvation issue. Yeah. You were saved by faith through grace, not of works, lest any man should boast. You couldn't earn your salvation. But if you truly want to have something to offer God, to love God, obedience is the way to go. So, beloved, I write no fresh command to you, but an old commandment which you had from the beginning. How different is that than what Yeshua told that one sage that come up to him? So what's the great commandment of the Torah? He was ready for a debate. Mm-hmm. Yeshua gave him one thing he full well knew and full well understood. He quoted another chapter that person would have been completely and totally surprised that he started where he did, because that was not custom. This is just absolutely amazing. He said, the old command is the word which you heard from the beginning. Again, I write to you a fresh command which is true in him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light now shines. What does he say? Do you remember the other half of what went on? Love your neighbor as yourself. What the Torah teaches you how to do. Matter of fact, if you go into Leviticus 19, you have no idea how much I wanted to just sit down and last night and start working on Leviticus 19 and showing all the different areas and see if I can incorporate into this teaching the different areas where we offend our brother in the faith, and different areas where we sin, where we offend what God's got for us, because Leviticus 19 breaks down real nicely into those manners. But that's another day. If you're looking for a Shabbat project, there you go. The one who says he is in the light and hates his brother is in the darkness till now. The one who loves his brother stays in the light, and there is no stumbling block in him. Gang. Makes you want to go back and look at Psalms 119, 165. Mm-hmm. It's just a thing of beauty. What God has done in his word, throughout his word, continuously confirms through different times, different situations, different people, and yet they're saying the same thing, aren't they? Absolutely amazing. It says, but the one who hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he's going. Remember? In Leviticus 19, you don't curse the deaf. You don't put a stumbling block before the blind. But hate says you're in the darkness. If you're in the darkness, gang, I hate to tell you this, but you need to hear it. If you're in the darkness, what are you? One of these little ones. One of the immature believers. Because it says the one who hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he's going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. See the tie into Leviticus 19:14? I write to you, little children, because your sins have been forgiven on account of his name. I write to you, fathers, because you have known him from the beginning. I write to you, young men, because you have overcome the wicked one. I write to you, little children, believers young in their faith, or believers long time in their faith, but still immature, because you have known the Father. Wow. What about this phrase, that it would be better for him that this millstone were cast around his neck, and that he would be literally hurled into the sea, at which point he would go straight down? What is that? Were better. What is that actually talking about? Well, it translates a Greek word used here in the New Testament. The meaning is that it would be less worse. That's pretty drastic. That really makes a case, because that millstone around your neck and going to the bottom of the sea, that's going to be a bad end to a bad day, isn't it? Or a bad end to whatever life you're leading. But he's saying that's worse than what you would suffer in the world to come. That's why it would be better. But what else we got? He says, in other words, the fate of a man who is lying drowned at the bottom of the sea is better than if he continues, that if his continuance in life would have led to causing one of these little ones to stumble. That's going to be very profound. That's going to stick with you. This brings us back to the beginning. Remember I said Luke 17 is not something that stands on its own? Here's where it starts. Then drew near unto him all the publicans and the sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees, scribes murmured, saying, this man receives sinners and eats with them. I did a series on the, called it the Father's Love, on Luke 15. We talked about the parable that is known as the prodigal son. And I need to put that back up on the website. But it's amazing how many times in Luke 16 I've gone back and talked about it, and here it is, Luke 17, and I'm coming back and talking about it. But thinking about this, you're talking about table fellowship here. The Pharisees see themselves in Leviticus 19:1 and 2, don't they? They see themselves as being holy. They're realizing that's something they're called to do. They are the teachers of the people. And they're very capable. They're very careful about who they table fellowship with, because they might not be keeping certain aspects of Torah, of cleanliness, in a manner that they are keeping it. Therefore, if you sat down and ate with them, or they might not be tithing everything properly, there's a phrase that it's going to render you unclean. I mean, look at these guys. They're tax collectors. If they've got the gall to do that, many of them were fellow Jews. To other Israelites, what is that going to do to us? Or they're sinners. These guys, they don't know the Torah like we do. You sure you want to sit down with those people? What does that say for you if you're going to sit down with those people? Okay, here's what I want you to see. Remember I talked about how your actions or inactions affect other people? You're seriously questioning, but imagine you're one of these tax collectors and you're hearing this. Imagine, worse, you're one of these people, because as a tax collector, you've already got some issues with yourself. Because you're in a very Torah-based society. But what if you're one of these people who's not a Pharisee, and you've just been stigmatized with a label of sinner? You didn't think you were as bad as a tax collector.
Right.
But the people you looked up to, the people who were your teachers, referred to you as a sinner. and just told somebody that you found absolutely amazing, that you're just totally enticed with. You want to hear him teach? And they said, you're a sinner. You're not like us. We shouldn't even have fellowship with you yet because you're not up to our standards yet.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. See, we didn't really cover this when we got into the Luke 15 series. Would those people have been offended? Would they have been caused to stumble? Even if they hadn't been caused to stumble, what had been done? Something that would impede them, that would slow them down, that would hinder them from hearing what Yeshua had to say, had been placed right in front of them. A stumbling block. Right at the beginning. Let's go forward. This next parable is going to show how much God values the lost. We know about this is about the 100 sheep. One's lost. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing. We've been through this a few times. But here's what I want you to see. Because this is an audio visual. You can stop it. You can read it. And then, when you get done with that, come to this slide. What do we notice in that parable? One lost out of 100. What's that? 1%. Remember we talked about that earlier in the teaching? But what does that one person do? He's not going to give up until that one is found. Does whatever he has to do in order to bring it back into the fold. And when he does this, it was just 1 out of 100. Okay, cool, I got everything back. Is that the attitude? No. He rejoices, but the rejoicing doesn't stop there. Friends and neighbors rejoice. You see, because that one being brought back, what do you have? You have a whole unity again. That echad, that corporate unity is restored. That is a joyous occasion. It's as if what was dead is now alive again. Let's look at another one. Remember earlier we talked about the 10 coins. One's lost. You can hear again if you want. You can stop it, go back, read it, and then come to this slide. Only 1 out of 10 is lost. Just 10%. You still have 90. But this gal, she doesn't give up. It says that she diligently searches until that one coin is found. What happens? What does she do? She's rejoicing, isn't she? That's amazing. She's not only rejoicing, she invites others to rejoice with her. That unity, that corporate unity, that community is restored. What was gone is back. It is whole. That is a case for rejoicing. The commonality of both in Luke 15:7 and in Luke 15:9. What are we looking at? Well, 15:7 says, I say unto you that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repents, more than over the 99 just persons which need no repentance. That's how much God values the lost. That even if he's got 99, just that 1%'s coming. Gang, that's reason for a party. Right? And Luke 15:9, and when she hath found it, she still got 9. She calls her friends and her neighbors together. Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which was lost. So what's God saying? Those lost, they may not be that important to you, but to me, they're everything. They are more valuable to God than you could ever know or imagine. So remember I talked about immature believers? Also those who are yet to come to know the Lord? Mm-hmm. Let's move forward. We all know this one. Father's got 2 sons. He's got a younger brother and he's got an older brother. And the younger one comes up to Dad. He wants his inheritance. Tells the father to, give him his portion. Now that's a little bit out of order in a Hebrew culture of the time. One, because the father's not dead, so he basically has the young son just offered a major offense to his father. Hey, Dad! What, son? I wish you were dead! Wow. That's not a very productive conversation, is it?
Nope.
I can see that going wrong in a number of ways. Father didn't do that. Because we'll come back to that. But the older brother was there. So the younger son, now he's old enough to be out on his own, as we'll see. So he's just offered an offense to Dad, but Dad didn't take it, did he?
No.
He's offered an offense to the community because he's just insulted the community. But what did the boy's older brother do? The older brother, gang, this is what I want you to see. This is what doesn't get covered. The older brother offers an offense. And you're looking at Scripture and saying, David, I just don't see it. The older brother would have been somewhat of a mentor to the younger brother. Even the father would have looked at the older brother to be there for his younger brother. The older brother knew that according to the Jewish laws of inheritance as laid down in Scripture, that he would get his inheritance before the younger would get his, because you couldn't do that out of order. He kept silent. What should he have done? Remember I talked about inaction? And the older brother had a serious inaction that offers a very, very huge offense, because it causes his younger brother to stumble and something fierce. He did nothing. He should have said, younger brother, whatever his name is, don't do this thing. Please, I beg of you. You've hurt your father. You've hurt the family. You have hurt the community. This type of thing isn't done. But what does he see? Do you remember in Luke 16 about worshiping mammon over God? What does he see? He sees the mammon coming, doesn't he? So he keeps his mouth shut. He's like, well, I don't have to say a thing. He's already done the dirty work for me. But if he goes out on his own, what else is happening if he goes out on his own? He's leaving his support unit. He is that one sheep that has gone away. He is that one coin that is lost. It fits more better with the sheep. Because the coin in of itself can't just say, well, I'm out of here. But the sheep can just sort of wander off in his own way, thinking he knows what's best, and trust me, they don't. That younger son has just left the community where he has learned of God, where he's grown up with God, his support unit within his family, within the community. He's just walked away, and what has he walked into? The world. The only way the world leads you back to God is by failing you so miserably to where you come to the realization that there is a huge distance between you and God and that you need to turn back. That's what the world has to give you. That's the best it can give you. Anything else is fading and passing away, isn't it? Now the older brother, and it's not a guarantee that you will come back. So the older brother does nothing to prevent his younger brother from walking away from his support system, walking away from God, and walking into the world. Where's the millstone? Almost should be with that brother. So you don't get that because most people teach, the brother didn't do anything wrong. If you want to get linguistics about it, an actual doing, maybe. But if you want to talk about inaction, that was an inaction that hurt. So here's what happens. And not many days after, the younger son gathered it all together and took his journey into a far country, left his support system, and wasted his substance with riotous living. Gang, that older brother would have known that was going to happen. They were brothers. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land. Remember I told you? That's the best the world can offer you? Is complete and total failure to where you hit bottom and realize just how far you've walked away from God and how much you need Him. And when he had spent all, there arose a mighty famine in the land, and he began to be in want. And he goes, well, I need to get back home right away because, hey, there was my support family, support group in the community, and need to get back to God. Is that what happens? No. Oh, my word, things are worse than we could have imagined. Because it says, and he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country and sent him into the fields to feed swine. When you're talking in Judaism and you're talking about pigs, it's usually the thing, the big example you use to talk about what's unclean. Always bringing up the pig. Matter of fact, the Judaism through its history, it's referred to Rome as pigs. It's referred to Christians as pigs. Yeah, the message is there. He has hit bottom. And 15, 20 to 24, and he arose and came to his father, but when he was yet a great way off, his father said, there's that miserable son that insulted me. There's that son I gave everything. I taught him in the ways of the Lord. I took care of him. He embarrassed me. He embarrassed his brother. He embarrassed the community. Do you see any of that there?
No.
The boy hasn't said anything yet. He's coming back. There's a word for that. It comes from shuv, which means to turn around. Teshuvah means you're walking the wrong direction. You're increasing the distance between you and God, but teshuvah is to turn around and decrease that distance by coming back to God. That's what the father sees long before the boy can do anything. And what does the father do? But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran. They don't do that in that culture. Everybody's looking and they're going, oh my word, how can you do that? That ingracious son, I mean, he's embarrassed us. How can you do that? At least cuss him out, something. Boy hasn't said anything. Father just sees him coming back. You want to talk about forgiveness? And the father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Now the son speaks. The son's coming back. You don't think he's worried about what the father might say? You don't think he's worried about what the town might say? He knows is what he's got to do. He knows is what he longs to do. He's hungry for that. He's looking even to be a hired hand, anything. The father alleviates those concerns before he can say anything. Gang, is that mercy? Is that rejoicing over what was lost? Father already knows he's coming back. He already knows. And yet the son said unto his father, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. All this happens before he even says this. That's a picture of the God we worship. That's the picture of the love that he has for us, the graciousness he has for us. But the father said to his servants, bring forth the best robe and put it on him. We're going to have a festival. We're going to have a celebration. We're going to have a party. And put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be married. For this my son was dead and is alive again. This is why I was talking about this earlier. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry. The father and his two sons. Everybody's happy. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Let's see how this plays out. So we notice the following. The younger son repents, but we can also say that the father, remember we talked about, the father didn't even wait for him to say anything, just simply saw him coming back, and the father went. We see that the younger son repents, the father rejoices. Father calls for a feast that others may rejoice with him. So let's see what else we got. In 28 to 32, let's talk about this older brother. The older brother is where the Pharisees, because in the younger brother, Yeshua would have shown the Pharisees, these are those people that you have just lambasted. You know, those tax collectors and those sinners. They would have seen themselves as the younger brother. And so they would have understood he was talking about them. Well, the older brother, who should have done something to make sure his brother didn't stumble like he did, he was angry. Wouldn't go in, and Dad comes out, and he's got a few things to say to his father. And when he does, he says, "Lo, there's many years I do serve thee. I've never transgressed at any time that commandment. You know, you never did this for me. You never gave me a kid that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this, your son," that's interesting, wasn't his brother, it was your son. Does that remind you of anything? Go back to the garden. "Lord, it was that woman that you gave me." Here we go. "But as soon as this, thy son was come, which has devoured your living." Wow. "With harlots thou hast killed for him the fatted calf. And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me." He said, You were always here. We were always together. Why? The anger. That's your brother. We're restored. Wouldn't that call for celebration? Wow. What is it that you didn't get? How about Leviticus 19, 17, and 18? "And he said unto him, Son, thou art ever with me. All that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad. For this thy brother was dead." You see hyperbole being used again, because if the brother was dead, he wouldn't have been able to walk back.
Right.
But that drives the point home, doesn't it? If someone is dead, they're not coming back, are they? That's final.
Right.
He's saying, but he was gone. It was like he was dead. But he's alive again. We've got him again. He was lost, but he's found. You're a father. You have two sons. Now, the one that's come back is found, and the one that was there is lost. Is that hard to handle or what? So we're going to notice the following. The brother's not rejoicing, is he? He's angry. He saw himself as righteous, just like the Pharisees. Right? In Leviticus 19:1 and 2, they understood they need to be holy, for he is holy. And they set themselves on that, and because of that, they saw themselves as righteous. And the people who weren't like them, they didn't see themselves as righteous. But here's what is really interesting. He thought he deserved his own party for his friends and himself. You see what's in parentheses there? Dad and the brother aren't mentioned. That's harsh, isn't it? He lambasted his brother. He thought higher of himself. In Luke 18, we see the same example. He didn't realize joy of always being with the Father. Gang, that's, if that don't wake you up, you the Pharisees hearing that, if that doesn't wake you up, if that doesn't cause you to turn and walk back to your Father, That is a very sad day indeed. So let's go to Luke 16, 1 to 8. You remember we talked about this in great length. We've got a steward. And here again, you can stop the teaching. You can read this. And then go ahead to this slide. But the steward, he's in charge of the master's properties and his stuff. And, well, he's not a very good steward, is he? So let's, I can't go back to it now. So here again, you can read this on your time. I keep forgetting I can't back up on this. I'll give you a little bit of time to read that. You can stop this and then come to this slide. The steward was an agent of the master. So anything he did, he was doing in the master's name. Wasn't very good agency, was it? So when he overcharged these people, people would have thought that the master had called for this. Would that cause people to stumble?
Good, yes.
Absolutely. But what does he do? He had recognized his own shortcomings. Granted, he realized his own shortcomings because he was going to soon be unemployed. And he also knew his own things he didn't want or couldn't do. Now, it doesn't say that he apologized. Now, think about this. You're the Pharisees. The story is being told about you. It doesn't say that he apologized. But he did restore his master's honor by charging them what they should have been charged. He did this above and beyond interest that he charged, because he was allowed to charge some, irreasonable. But this above and beyond was restored. And by that, he had restored the master's honor. So in other words, the Pharisees, he's trying to get them to realize that they're not being as good as stewards as they could be. And there's a how much more so being implied here. Calvacomer, there we go, which is a how much more. In other words, if this steward, to save his own hide, can realize what he needs to do to restore the master's honor, how much more should you, who know me and claim to love me, seek to restore the honor? If he can do it, and this is from the least to the greatest. The least would be somebody who's not even looking to repent, right? But just looking to save his own hide. I'm not saying that the Pharisees are just trying to save their own hide, but he's saying, if this guy can do it, shouldn't you? Luke 16, 19 to 31. Oh, remember this. You've got beggar and the Lazarus. Or the beggar and Lazarus is the beggar. Excuse me, I got about 3 hours sleep last night. You got a rich man and Lazarus. Which one do you suppose is representative of the Pharisees? It ain't Lazarus. Mm-hmm. And so, I'll read this one. There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. This was the last parable in Luke 16. Very final thing, very harsh thing. It is the conclusion of the last thing you're going to say to these people. Because in Luke 17, you're speaking to the disciples. And if you take it to its logical closing point, that would be heaven or hell, wouldn't it? If that doesn't get your attention, what will? He says, and in hell, he lifted up his eyes. Remember earlier I said he would have been better off with a millstone? Because at least he wouldn't be in hell. Let's look at hell. What kind of place is it? being in torments, and sees Abraham off afar, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime received thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things, but now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot. In other words, you can see where you thought you were going, and you're not there, and you can't go there. You see where the millstone's a much better thing? Even better than a millstone is to lead a life that doesn't warrant needing one. Neither can they pass to us that they would come from thence. Then he said, I pray thee, therefore, Father, that thou wouldest send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. Abraham saith unto him, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. Now, we just got done with Luke 16, so I'm not going to rehash the whole thing. We're just going to touch on some high points here. I want you to notice the following. The rich man, he had the ability to help Lazarus. Now remember, there was this gate. It would have been an ornamental gate. This would have been something like what we called a cul-de-sac almost. And Lazarus would have been laid there by people who didn't have the ability to help. But they would have seen the rich man because he walked back and forth every day. You'd be able to see him dressed in the finest clothes, eating sumptuously, feasting every day. That ain't cheap, is it? He would have had the means to help, but yet everyone could see him. He didn't do this in his own house, in the privacy of his own house. It was seen. Would that cause someone to stumble? You see, because that's obviously who's being referred to as the Pharisees. You'd look and you'd say, well, there's someone who's able to help. And you say to yourself, and they were the teachers in the first century. Matter of fact, so much so that the people, they demanded that the liturgy that was done in the what we would call the home churches be done in the temple. And you know that didn't sit well with the Sadducees. But if you didn't, they wouldn't go. Those were their teachers. Rich man was the one who could have helped, and by his inaction didn't. That would cause a serious stumbling block. The rich man saw riches only as a blessing from God and not a seed to sow. Even in hell, no remorse for Lazarus. Gang, if a parable like this, if you're the Pharisees and a parable like this doesn't just totally make your heart ache for what you could have done, what you should have done, and haven't done, I don't know what will. I don't know what will. And here again, the rich man would have been better off with a millstone around his neck. God can't make you love. He can give you instructions. He can tell you. He can show you the finality of the matter. But that's a decision that you can make, and only you can make. After Yeshua warned the Pharisees about the sin of loving money, he then turned to his disciples to warn them about possible sins in their lives for occasions to stumble are an unfortunate part of our life. After all, we are all sinners living in a sinful world, but we must take heed not to cause others to stumble, for it is a serious thing to sin against a fellow believer and tempt him or her to sin. But remember, we don't know who's actually believers, who isn't, and who's looking at us and is about to become a believer. See, because God knows we don't. So I'd say it extends beyond believers, wouldn't you? There are people who are won to the Lord by our conduct. We may not be crafty with our words. We may have different things that we're called to. But isn't our life a living testimony unto God? Correction, isn't our life supposed to be a living testimony unto God?
Right.
I want to go back to this. Just think about this as I read it. May God reveal to you through His Ruach HaKodesh what He wants you to see. But the author of this has just done such a wonderful commentary. I wanted to close with it. My little children, I write this to you so that you do not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an intercessor or advocate with the Father, Yeshua Messiah, a righteous one. And He Himself is an atoning offering for our sins. And not for ours only, but also for all the world. And by this we understand that we understand Him, if we guard His commandments. The one who says, I know Him, and does not guard His commandments, is a liar. And the truth is not in him. But whoever guards His word, truly the love of Elohim has been perfected in him. By this we understand that we are in Him. The one who says he stays in Him ought also to walk, even as He walked. Beloved, I write no fresh command to you, but an old command which you had from the beginning. The old command is the word which you heard from the beginning. Again, I write to you a fresh command which is true in Him and in you, because the darkness is passing away and the true light now shines. The one who says he is in the light and yet hates his brother is in darkness until now. The one who loves his brother stays in the light, and there is no stumbling block in him. But the one who hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in the darkness and does not know where he's going, because the darkness has blinded his eyes. I write to you, little children, because your sins have been forgiven on account of His name. I write to you, fathers, because you have known Him from the beginning. I write to you, young men, because you have overcome the wicked one. I write to you, little children, because you have known the Father. Closing thoughts. Originally, when I put this together, a number of things I thought I was going to save to this point, I've already covered. I would simply ask you, search your own heart. God will show you areas that either through action or inaction you may have set a stumbling block before someone. Only God can show you. To see the areas where they were done by action is a little easier to see, isn't it? Because we see people, but for a short period of the day, we don't see what they go through after we leave, do we? We don't know the extent of the pain we may have caused, or the people who are watching us. Even Paul deals with this in the letters. He talks about, there are people who believe, they talk about, well, that this food was, offered to this idol, or we went to a place and there was a statue of this, and he says, guys, you guys know that there's no other God. You know it's just a statue. So it doesn't affect you. You know that there's only one true God. But you know what? That knowledge may not be real in the hearts of others around you. If there are things that cause them to stumble, don't you do it. Right? See, we worry so much about being right, about proving a point. We look at liberties as, well, I've got a right to do this. I've got liberty to do this. Torah says I can do this. And it's not worth it. if those liberties cause a part of that echad to stumble. Because if a part of that echad stumbles, understand that the whole echad stumbles. Something to think about. Have God show you action, inaction, words spoken, words not spoken, maybe something as simple as inappropriate jokes. In a Jewish culture, to embarrass somebody was equated with murder. Because the face turned red, this is the blood went to the face. To destroy the dignity of a person could be an offense. That person may look up to you. Something to think about. May God guide and lead you in what you've heard today. May He continue you in a deeper understanding of His Word. May He show you the depths of the love that He has for you in His Word. May He show you the degree to which you are loving Him by being faithful to what He's called you to do, what He's called you to say, as well as what He's called you to keep your mouth shut. And that He's got it. May He guide you and lead you in all things according to His Word, in a way that glorifies Him. And with this, I bid you Shalom.